So how do we apply the independent samples t-test? Remember our rule. Let's check first the normality of our data to see if it's really, we can really apply independent samples t-test based on the criteria of normality. So let's try to analyze, and then we have here descriptive statistics, then explore. So the only data that we will explore here actually is the anxiety score. So you just place it on the dependent list, and again 95%. You also have the plots, and then let's check on the histogram, the normality plots, and then continue. Then okay, so looking at the results of the normality test. So let me just this one, enlarge the page. So you have here 24 number of participants. Then you can have here, you also have here the mean score. Then you have the test for normality. So we can look at the Shapiro-Wilk test, and you have 0.498 as the significance value, which means that we can assume that the data is normally distributed. So it's ideal that we use independent samples t-test, looking at the histogram also, and even on the plot, QQ plot. So you have here lying on the best fit line. So going back to our SPSS data view page. So we can use now independent samples t-test. So analyze, click analyze, then click compare means, then you click now independent samples t-test. So I'll just return them here. There. So what we will do is to place this one, the groupings, on the grouping variable, and the anxiety score on the test variable. So click options. So we set it at 95% confidence interval. Then continue. Oh, sorry. So we still need to define the groups. So group 1 is, just type here 1, and that's the group exposed to the picture, and then 2 for the real cockroach, and then you continue. Then after defining the groups, you click OK, and you have now the result. So this is the result of the independent samples t-test. You look at the descriptives also. So you have the mean scores per group. So you have 12 participants per group. This is the mean score for the first group, and then for the second group, you can use this data for the interpretation later. And then you have the independent samples t-test table, and this is our main table that we need to interpret. So how do we interpret this table? This time, let's interpret the table. I know you're confused what to read here because you have two rows having here equal variances assumed and then equal variances not assumed. So when do we read these rows, or how do we choose what to interpret? So the first thing that we need to consider in reading the independent samples t-test result for SPSS, take note that the independent samples t-test also assumes homogeneity of variance. So it means that the two groups should have the same kind of variability. Now, what should we read to establish that the two groups now, you have group 1 exposed to a picture of cockroach, and then group 2 real cockroach, have the same kind of variability? So we have the Levene's test. So it's test for equality of variances. So this section is called 2 columns. We will focus on the interpretation first before we read the whole result. So it tests whether the variances of two samples are approximately equal. So how do we know if we can assume equal variances between the two groups or not really equal variances? So if the p-value or the significance value, this one, if it's greater than 0.05, then Levene's test is non-significant, which means that we can assume equal variances. But if the p-value is less than 0.05, then it's significant, so equal variances are not assumed. So since the value here is greater than 0.05, what we will do now is we will read this upper row. That's how we identify what will be interpreted for the independent samples t-test. The lower row now, well, we can disregard that since we have established here that the two groups have approximately equal variances. So how do we interpret this result? So you can see the p-value, the degrees of freedom, and then the significance value also, and even the other details. So how do we interpret and write the results of independent samples t-test? In the APA format, what we need to report, you have the following: the mean scores. So you go back again to the result of SPSS having the mean values per group, and even the standard deviations, the t-value, degrees of freedom, so this is always in parentheses next to the t-value, t, and the significance level. So here's the interpretation. On average, participants who were exposed to real cockroach experienced greater anxiety. So you have here the notation, the mean score is 47, the standard deviation is 11.3. Than those who were exposed to pictures of cockroach. Why spiders? Should be cockroach. However, this difference was not significant. So you can see here, since what we wanted to establish is there any significant difference between the two groups? But looking at the significance value, 0.107, it's greater than 0.05, so it's not significant. So the difference between the two groups. So either picture or real cockroach, the anxiety level among the two groups are not really that significant in terms of the difference. So you have also the notation here. So another way of expressing it or writing the interpretation. Levine's test shows that there exists equal variances between those exposed to real cockroach and those exposed to pictures of cockroach. So you have the p-value, it's greater than 0.05 here. On average, participants who were exposed to real cockroach experienced greater anxiety than those who were exposed to pictures of cockroach. Hey, spiders again. So, however, this difference was not significant. And so you have the notation here, degrees of freedom, and then you have the other values and greater than 0.05. So you have the p-value, it's negative 1.68. So what we will do now with our hypotheses, so we will accept now our null hypothesis that there's no significant difference on the anxiety levels of Athenians who were exposed to real cockroach than those who were exposed to a picture of cockroach. So as simple as that. So just imagine how the effect of cockroach to Athenians' level of anxiety. So if that's established, even just a picture or real cockroach, then they will have the level of anxiety is not different. I think that speaks about Athenians in reality.